We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
We're back talking liberty with Scott DeCosenza here on Liberty Nation Radio. Earlier in the show, we were talking about a recent Supreme Court argument on the First Amendment. But now I want to move to a case out in New York City, Scott, with Donald Trump, of all people, because, you know, he is dominating the legal headlines nowadays among the political.
Don't say. He's involved in some litigation?
Just a little bit, yeah. I'm sure you obviously haven't seen it. Because, you know, it's not an important matter. But yes, Donald Trump recently just fined in New York City court $350 million plus interest owed, interest that accrues at $112,000 a day, I might add, which is, I would like to be that guy's banker, right? Yeah, whoever's receiving that. But Scott, this issue, I want to talk about it, how it reflects on New York and how it reflects on the justice system. So if you could give us your brief, just your hot take on the verdict.
Mark, my hot take on the verdict is one that I have had for really since I started law school, probably, which is that prosecutors have far too much power and need to be reined in, and we are kind of all mad, living in a mad world if we don't do that and change the way we kind of let these people exercise their power. I've long said that prosecutors should be forbidden from seeking advanced electoral office. I think that would be a good constitutional change for a lot of states, because what we see over and over again, whether it's in Georgia with Fani Willis or in New York with Letitia James, is that prosecutors are using their the awesome power of their office, not for the betterment of society or to kind of do what most people would argue is sort of a nuts and bolts law and order kind of campaign, but instead go after those who they wish to punish for political and voting reasons.
So I think you've kind of hit the nail on the head there, is that for many people, it does seem like Donald Trump is being punished for. A lot of business leaders across America have come out saying they're not going to do real estate business in New York again, because Donald Trump is essentially being found liable. It is civil court, obviously, found liable for what they say what was standard business practice. But I think the question,
I think perhaps even more importantly, just to shoehorn in there, Mark, is he's being held liable to the tune of hundreds of millions of dollars for something that the supposed victim of this fraud says they're not a victim of, namely a bank that he did business with, who made money on loans.
Yeah, I mean, it's quite breathtaking, really, to the layman here, I guess. And I guess to as a lawyer yourself, you find it quite strange and shocking. But here's the thing: so there's 350 million plus all the interest that has to be paid. Now, here's the thing: the Judge Arthur Engeron, ordered that that fine had to be paid straight away, regardless of appeal. So Donald Trump is obviously appealing. He's already launched his appeal against it, but he has to pay that regardless.
Yeah, there's a thing in the law that's called an appeal bond that is widely used, and basically companies will often try to get out of liability for any big judgment, as you might imagine, right?
Sure.
I mean, rare is the company facing a hundreds of millions of dollars in liability that says, okay, where do we send our check, please? You know, they're all trying to escape liability. And one of the protections for, quote unquote, the little guy, if you will, that's implemented into law is, this kind of appeal bond or posting appeal money before that it's been exhausted, so that the people are kind of likely those who have been wronged. Okay, that's who the system is set up to benefit in its contemplation, have something then to go after. Mark, all of our laws are insufficient to protect us from prosecutors who are using the law to punish their political enemies. We can't implement enough safeguards to protect us from that. We have to put in the people who will do it, because the laws will never be sufficient to protect us.
So yeah, So I've had this theory going around in my head, and I can't seem to shake it off. So I want to run it by you here, and I might be completely wrong. So listeners out there in Radio Land, take what I'm about to say with a pinch of salt, but listen carefully to Scott's answer on this. So I think the question here, Scott, and this is no doubt one that many people might be asking themselves, is whether an average citizen, somebody without wealth in the billions or even millions, if they were done an injustice by a court, and I'm not saying that Donald Trump was done an injustice by the court, but if they were and they were planning to appeal, but they're denied the ability to appeal unless they pay up first. Now, this could almost certainly, and here's the key point, this could be used to obstruct defendants from being able to exercise their right to appeal, essentially denying them a right.
Right.
Now, how do you
Yeah.
square that circle, Scott? Or have I got it completely off base?
No, 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 you have. I think that probably for you and lots of other people, they don't realize that that's what I would call stock in trade for how the Department of Justice and prosecutorial authorities go after defendants. One of the first things they'll do when they see somebody they want to go after is literally seize their bank accounts
Mm.
and assets so that they can't be used to mount a defense, even where there is somebody who, let's say, for instance, they allege that somebody's done something wrong in a corporate form. They almost never allege that the entirety of that person's net worth, for instance, is tied up in the criminal enterprise, right? But maybe their entire bank accounts are being seized. So
Right.
the Department of Justice and prosecutors never want a fair playing field. That is the biggest lie that's been passed over the people. They are after advantage, and they must be brought to heel by the people that hold their leash if they do. Because if they let go of that leash, which I think is what's happened in America broadly, is you get what we have, which is, you could also say it sort of on the other side, which is, I'm sure that there are plenty of people who are progressives or Democrats who don't like the idea of Ken Paxton, for instance, having the powers that he does in Texas. All of us have to fear for prosecutors who are willing, to use politics to guide their choices rather than justice and the laws and sort of the people's will.
Sticking with New York, Scott, the Alvin Bragg case against Donald Trump over
Mm.
hush money payments. Well, in fact, it's over a paperwork violation, technically, rather than hush money payments, is coming to a head
Mark, this is a
soon.
serious state crime. I can't imagine why you would suggest otherwise.
Absolutely. But I just want to get your take on that. There's a gag order being asked for by Alvin Bragg
Yes.
against Donald Trump. Now,
Right.
gag orders, they seem to be de rigueur for Donald Trump, who's, he's only trying to win a presidential election. So, gag orders can't possibly hurt him politically. Your take?
Well, I'm sure this is just about the good governance of the case itself and not a political effort by Mr. Bragg to silence criticism from him. And if you can't see the sarcasm dripping from my mouth as I say that,
We'll
know
put a
that
red
it's
banner on
there.
this.
I was shocked to learn recently that they want to introduce the infamous Access Hollywood tape where Trump's, sort of famous vulgar speech about, well, we all know what, right?
Yeah,
And somehow that would be relevant
to
to
a
a case
paperwork
where there
violation.
is, well, this is about whether or not some money he paid was, correctly accounted
He
for.
legally paid, was correctly accounted for. Yeah.
That's the point, right? Like, so what does this inflammatory tape have to do with anything? It's so preposterous. And I expect that the request for the gag order is simply to avoid Donald Trump's withering comments, as we know he likes to make.
I'm fairly sure that Donald Trump wishes that he'd hired an accountant now instead of managing his business enterprise all by himself. Scott DeCosenza, I want to thank you for putting up with my weird questions
My
today.
pleasure.
Much
I think
appreciated.
I think that the real takeaway for me is that the lawyers of America need to come up with a nice basket of something for Mr. Trump for keeping so many of us employed.
It's a full employment act, as we call it.
Indeed.
Scott, thanks so much.
Thanks, Mark.
And that's about all we have time for on this week's edition of Liberty Nation Radio, heard coast to coast on the Radio America. I've been your host, Mark Angelides. I'd like to thank our guests today, Liberty Nation's editor-in-chief, Lisa K. Donner, and Liberty Nation's legal affairs editor and host of the excellent Uprising podcast, Mr. Scott D. Cosenza, Esquire. And of course, extend my thanks to you, the listeners, for taking the time to tune in and be with us here today. You are appreciated. We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
Don't get caught up in the media madness. Join our movement for free thinking and free speech at libertynation.com. Publishing news and analysis 24/7 with original articles by our team of authors who tell it like it is. Join us each week for online TV shows, The Uprising Podcast, and Liberty Nation Radio. We believe in free thinking and free speech. We are libertynation.com.